Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're just going to give it another 2 minutes for folks to finish joining and then we'll get started. I don't have any introductory music to wait for everyone, but Jenny Petty, you could do some humming. We could do a duet. What do you think?
Would you like some Taylor Swift?
No,
It's my
I hate that.
specialty. Okay, well, that's all I've got.
Okay, let's sit in silence for the next 2 minutes. Thanks, everyone. Whilst we're waiting to get started, if you are joining us, please feel free to post in the chat with your name and what institution you're joining us from. Jenny, I too would like to listen to your stand up during these 2 minutes of us waiting. I have not had the joy of hearing that yet. Okay, I think we're going to get started now. Thank you everyone for joining us today. It's incredible to see so many of you. Please again feel free to post your name and where you're joining us from in the chat. Whether you're joining us from New York in a blizzard or a boardroom in Texas, we're really happy to have you with us. My name is Murray Simpson. I'm the SVP of Growth at Simpson Scarborough, and I am privileged to be your host for today. We are here to share the first chapter of our 25 to 26 CMO study, covering our budgets and staffing data. This is always our most popular study because since 2014, when it was started, CMOs have been using these benchmarks to make the case for marketing investment on campus. So, a lot of this data has been used over the last decade. There is a lot for us to unpack. So, this year we're releasing all of that data in 3 chapters. So, today we're covering budgets and staffing and how investments have changed since our last study. On March 26th, we'll be covering growth ambitions and how institutions are planning to grow. And finally, we'll be covering measurement on April 23rd and the struggle of aligning results across campus. You can sign up for the next chapters on our website, and we'll also drop a QR code at the end of today. I really want to jump into today's event. I am joined by 2 incredible panelists today. First up is Jenny Petty, who's our VP of Industry Relations and Advisory Services. For those who don't know Jenny, she spent over a decade in higher ed, most recently as CMO at the University of Montana, and she joined Simpson Scarborough about 7 weeks ago. Jenny and I bonded immediately over higher ed and heated rivalry. And this webinar will contain references to both of those things. So, welcome to my new work bestie and your future BFF, Jenny Petty. Going to do little rounds of applause for our panelists as I go through. So, Jenny, because this chapter is all about budgets and staffing, I want to do a little icebreaker with you. If I handed you an unexpected $1 million tomorrow for your marketing team at Montana, what would you spend it on first and why?
So, Murray, I spent my higher ed career on 2 public campuses out west, and I got to be pretty scrappy through that process. So, I would stretch every dollar out of that million that I could. And I would do a couple of different things. I would experiment with agentic AI, especially as we talk about alignment today, in finding systems and operations that could help us have better alignment. I would continue to experiment with brand experience, which is something that we did a lot at Montana and really helped drive retention. And then I would split the rest between brand and performance paid media and run lead gen campaigns that are also backed by the amazing brand work that we did at the University of Montana.
That all sounds very practical. I thought you would say Super Bowl ad and vibes. So that was. I'm proud of you, Jenny. That is a
Thank
great response.
you. vibes is this the fourth thing that I would invest in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to introduce our special guest, Bill Campbell, who's the VP of Operations and Communications at Chatham University. Bill has been at Chatham for 14 years. And Bill, a year ago, I think I've got this written down right, your role evolved to include Marcom, IT, facilities management, events and conferences, and retail services. So that is
Yes.
a broad remit. So Bill, same question for you. Beyond what I know is a very expensive hair care routine, which I know you have, what would you spend $1 million on and why?
So, with the shift of marketing and now this broader portfolio, my day shifts from brand to performance marketing acquisition to, workday implementations and beyond. So on a certain day, I'd say $1 million on backflow plumbing preventers sounds pretty spectacular. But I don't know if this is quite the audience for that today. From my perspective, $1 million, we've been really focusing we're a small private institution, so resources are constrained. Like Jenny, you stretch everything you can. I think I would try to invest that $1 million in ways that can create structural long-term change for the marketing department and the university as a whole. So, one of the things that we've been really focused on is we're never going to have the headcount numbers we once had, but it's all about how can we competitively attract great talent and retain that talent, even if you used to do it with 10 and now you want to figure out how to do it with six or seven. But paying those six and seven people the types of wages that keep them in higher ed and attract them here from wherever else they can go.
Mm,
Because investing in a smaller but more experienced and well compensated marketing team will pay dividends for a university for years to come.
great. Bill, that's actually very topical because we're going to be talking about investment changes in salaries from 2023 to 2025. So we'll have an opportunity to pick your brain a bit more on that shortly. Before we do that, I'm going to start today by running through the headline data in the study. And for those of you who've got specific questions about the methodology or the instrument, I don't have the answer to those questions, but our Director of Research, Deb Gear, does, and she will be active in the chat today. And you can also use the Q&A functionality, and we've kept time at the end for questions and answers. So this year, we are really thrilled to see that we had 256 lead marketers complete the study. That is one of the highest in the study's history. This consists entirely of four-year not-for-profit institutions with a healthy balance of privates and publics. And from an enrollment standpoint, we have strong representation across institution size, which you can see here. Unfortunately, today, you won't hear us break down data for certain types of institutions like HBCUs or HSIs due to the low sample sizes. But you will hear us slice the majority of insights by the institution size. This is what we found CMOs find the most useful for making comparisons and bringing that data back to the institution. So our categories are small being under 4,000, medium being 4 to 20, and large 20 plus. So when you see these mentioned throughout the report, these are the definitions that we're referencing. So I'm going to get started with some of the headline data. And before we dive into budgets, we're going to start with a snapshot of influence data. And that is the data that shows what influence marketing has at the organization. We've been measuring job titles, reporting lines, and cabinet presence over the last decade. And we've got great news this year, and that is that higher ed marketing leaders are continuously getting more executive presence at the institution. This is Ilya Rosenov in his Russian accent, which I'm not going to imitate. He says, good job. Here's the data that shows that trend. So we've got 69% of institutions now having a CMO or VP job title, which is up from 63% in 2023. We've got nearly two-thirds that report directly to the president or the chancellor, and 7 out of 10 of these now sit on cabinet. Me and Jenny were talking about this the other day. That's really not a comms office in the basement anymore. Marketing has that formal visibility and that proximity to power. And we're expecting that that will just continue to rise in future years. But the definition of influence is what is likely going to change. I saw a quote yesterday on LinkedIn that just it made me laugh. And it was that marketing has finally got the seat, but they're not invited until after the main course is served. And that lack of input into product, pricing, investments, that's a huge area where misalignment occurs. Now, the good news is we are seeing more CMOs expand their remit into those upstream decisions, much like Bill's role. And so, Bill, we're going to pick your brain on that, on how that really takes shape a bit later on. When that shift happens, budgets do start to move too, which is a really good segue into talking about the budget data. So these are the self-reported numbers that institutions have for dollars spent in marketing. And we've compared this to 2023 to see if presidents and cabinets are actually investing more in central Marcom. Here we have sliced the data by institutional size. And that's because smalls, large publics, medium privates, they all behave very differently when it comes to investment. I will move through this data quite quickly, but it's all available to download in our full report, and you can then use those to benchmark back at your institution. So don't worry, it's all going to be there. Now, this slide contains the median central Marcom budget by school size from 2023 to 2025. And this is all up staffing, tech, media, the full budget. Now, as you can see here, medium privates and large institutions are growing. Small schools are essentially flat, and those medium publics are experiencing a decline. So this tells us what's happening at the surface, but we've broken this budget down by salaries and media so we can actually see how that investment is shifting. And that's where it starts to get interesting. Across most segments, growth isn't really showing up in flexible spend, it's going to payroll. For large institutions and medium privates especially, which you can see here on the right-hand side, almost all of that increase is salary. And our main question is why? Is headcount increasing or are junior roles being replaced with higher skilled, more expensive roles? Now, this is moving very quickly right now, especially with AI. So it's hard to know what's happening from a survey. We need to talk to the people. And luckily, I have two people here with me today who are going to have a perspective on this. So, Jenny, I want to start with you. Are you surprised to see payroll costs going up? And why do you think we saw this trend last year?
I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think starting around COVID, we started to get really intentional about retention in higher ed and employees. We hadn't done that before. We knew we had to get more competitive with salaries, but I think, like Bill said earlier, the work is getting more complex and more technical in some ways. And so we're having to hire skill sets that require larger salaries. And I also think in some instances, you have state systems that are mandating increases across the board, which naturally makes budgets rise.
Mhm. So you're anticipating higher skilled, potentially more specialist roles.
I think that's the hope. Yeah.
Bill, what do you think?
Um, it's really interesting data that you all are seeing. And, I've been in higher ed now 14 years, came from the agency side, and I came in when a lot of outside higher ed folks were coming in. And now your data shows we have a seat at the table, right? We're in the cabinet. That means you have more influence. It used to be you were fighting for more positions. Now they're looking, boards are aware, they're looking at. So I think that just comes naturally with where we are as a sector, is that there are investments occurring, and we're starting to have seen those over the last few years. So I think they're showing up in the data. Generally, the payroll costs are high across an institution. What you worry about is as you move into a AI disruption or a cost-cutting component, that this is now going to be viewed like other areas in a university that are like larger parts of workforce that are maybe not as critical, right? So you hope overcorrection doesn't occur. And again, that's where I get back to what I'd love to see in this data. Is this a growth in overall headcount? Is it that senior to mid-level side that's coming in more that's driving this? Because I do believe that with both technology and where our sector is going, managing your revenue and expenses, making sure that you are running in a headcount model that allows you to get the most out of your people, attract quality people, and retain them is really important. So perhaps with the next CMO study and webinar, you guys will dig even deeper into some of those trends.
Every year we find new trends to dig into. So I think not only looking at roles and headcounts, but what institutions are looking to in-house and outsource over the next few years. I think that's going to be really telling data, both from skills gap analysis and what it is that people need to look for when it comes to hiring in the future. Okay, I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about this later on in the webinar. I then wanted to flip over into investments that are happening when it comes to digital media promotion from central Marcom. This is actually really interesting. We noted earlier that medium publics are down overall. They've reduced overall marketing investment and they've reduced investment in salaries. But they're actually the only ones who've had an increase in digital spend, very likely doubling down on activation in market to overturn awareness or enrollment pressures. And when you look across the board, they're actually the only school size that have spent more on central brand marketing. The needle really hasn't moved for small, medium, or large schools. And in our last study, that was a big driver. That's something that CMOs wanted to do. So it feels a bit disheartening. It feels a bit like an area that a lot of institutions do want to invest more into, especially because brand is how we communicate our value. Now, when we look at this data, we don't believe the overall is an institution isn't investing money in media. All other studies say differently. So in this year's study, we did add some new questions and we decided to dig in to the media spend that's happening outside of central Marcom, specifically in admissions, because here's the thing. Most CMOs in this room are fighting for 150K just to fund brand building. When in reality, in admissions, some institutions are running seven-figure media budgets completely outside of central. And if you look here at the range between the median and the maximum media spend, that variability is enormous. Even for some schools who are spending $2.5 million on admissions and only 170K on brand. Now, every dollar in admissions media is serving impressions about the institution, but it's not necessarily through the CMO's strategy or lens. And so that means that CMOs are being held accountable for brand perception without holding authority, but actually not even visibility over how all the dollars are shaping it. And most CMOs actually don't see this come up until they see performance data or some form of internal tension. Now we know why this is happening. We see it across verticals. When immediate financial pressure hits, performance always gets prioritized. But this is a lot of money, and we have a lot of trust from the public that we need to gain right now. I don't need to preach this to everyone, but we're in a time where Americans struggle to see how the value of higher ed shows up in their own lives every day. So what we put out in market is more important now than ever. And performance media, when you look at this visual, often convinces people with data. It's the inquire now, the program USPs, the rankings. But when that's done, we risk losing the heart component, the brand raising that really shows how higher ed shows up in people's everyday lives. We know that CMOs are not integrating brand and performance together, but we know that it works. This research here from the World Advertising Research Center, they found that 90% of brands that outperform have integrated brand and performance together. And even more interestingly, they actually found by over investing in performance, we're reducing our ROI. Now, there is a good reason for that. We call it an efficiency tax, which is really what happens when our brands are over-serving the audience across brand and performance. It means that frequency is ramped, we're repeatedly serving impressions, reach is constricted, and we're starving the algorithm of scale. And auction competition increases because everyone's targeting the same high intent users. Now, this is one of those places where by not aligning our brand and performance efforts, alignment debt is actually compounding and not in salary costs, not in death by committee, but in the results that we generate every day. So you might think that integration is easy, but CMOs are actually feeling a lot of nervousness here. When we looked at the most recent research from Gartner, they just predicted that over 40% of CMOs who push for larger brand budgets will actually lose influence with the C-suite. And they found the biggest gap with CMOs advocating brand for investment is the inability to accurately measure it for the organization. So when we look at this report, they actually say the main way to break that loop is with a decision-ready ROI story. And that's a story that the CFO at the organization can actually act on. So here's my last question for Jenny and Bill. We just saw that investment in brand is stagnant, but performance is skyrocketing. And that may actually damage our long-term ROI. So, if 40% of CMOs are at risk of losing influence for pushing larger brand budgets, what are we missing and what should we do?
I think we still struggle to tell the brand story on our campuses the way that the performance story can be told, which is that it's tied directly to revenue. There's an urgency that comes to it. On many of our campuses, it's easy to sell the urgency story right now. We actually, in many times, have to. But it's harder to tell the brand story. It's harder to explain to a CFO why brand matters and why heart matters in addition to the performance work we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I would observe that, if you even a non-marketer, right? Like if you're talking to a CFO or others in the cabinet, if you craft your brand story around marketing story around companies like Nike and Apple, right? That all of them love, all of them know, and all of them understand and or have the product. Those companies do brand marketing, right? And they are some of the highest capitalized and worth companies in the world. So I think, education about brand is really, really important. And so when we present this work, tying it to those things that people can understand, I think is very, very important. And using those comparators to show what you have. The other thing that I would say is that when I first came into higher ed, it was all about kind of this brand, and we were moving that way. And Simpson Scarborough was a leader in helping this come to its place, and we're mature now. And then performance came and acquisition came next, and it's maturing. So they're both mature, and now it's going to be kind of what's the balance that we have moving forward. I believe the real trick for us with brand is to cast it not just externally, but to cast it internally. The tools and tactics that we use need to be done on campus, right? They need to be deployed to retain our students as much as acquire our students or build awareness. And I think that the marketer who can figure out how to kind of tie that together and partner with student affairs and partner with others to make this also measurable to retention and experience, I think that's ultimately where it starts to head in the coming years.
Yeah. I think both those points are really interesting, and it sounds like it's about not always thinking about these things in isolation, right? You've got lead generation, enrollment, you've got marketing brand, and then you've also got student experience. And that system and how all of that ties together can be quite a difficult thing to explain to a cabinet when by nature our roles are quite fragmented across the organization. And so, Bill, I do think when we get to our Q&A, 10-minute Q&A with you, we can dive into that a little bit more. Okay, that actually is a great segue into our next section. So when we look through this first chapter's preliminary data, marketing has the seat, CMOs are in the room, but having the seat doesn't mean we have the system. Right now, we would say that accountability is with the CMO, but authority and that system to implement it is not. So if that next era is about creating the system to make it work, I will hand it over to Jenny Petty to take us on a journey of what we need to do in this next era. So, Jenny.
Thanks so much, Murray. I think there's so much encouraging data. There's so much to be happy about that we finally have a seat at the table. And even when we talk about budget and the growth that we're seeing, maybe even outside of of their central Marcom departments, there's so much good news in this year's report. But I kept coming back to a different question when I looked at it. And it was like, why does this work still feel so hard to align? So we want to spend this next kind of part of the presentation and webinar talking about an underlying pattern that we see across higher ed, especially at scale, which we are calling the alignment gap. So I'm sure you all have stories like this, but when I heard the phrase alignment gap for the first time, I actually had like an emotional and almost physical reaction to it because it brought up a memory of a time when I was, working my buns off on campus trying to close a 10-year enrollment decline, working just crazy amount to fix a lot of problems. And my boss asked me what I was doing to get more people to basketball games. And it really, in my mind, was that space that the alignment gap represents. It's like what leadership is intending, what central teams are designing and working on, and then what actually happens day to day across our campus and decentralized units. And the alignment gap ends up showing up when strategy, structure, and daily behavior fall out of sync, like when I was asked what I was going to do to promote basketball. I would love for you all to drop in the chat places that you have been asked to pitch in or other duties as assigned, not including Bill, who's doing everything on on his campus, but common places that misalignment show up for CMOs. I think these are all going to be places that you have experienced this too. If there are other areas, please throw them in the chat. But there's, product development. Raise your hand if you found out about a product or a program that has launched mere weeks before it was expected to enroll in students and drive revenue. Or did you find out about it when it was in the course catalog? And oh, by the way, there's no marketing budget. Pricing. We're often held responsible in part for enrollment numbers, but we're not included in financial aid or pricing strategies. Academic portfolio decisions. This is happening across the country right now with academic portfolio reform and projects being done where either programs are being added or sunset, but there's no market research and there's no continuing to offer programs or we're continuing to offer programs that don't have demand, which is really, really tough. Technology investments. Tools are being purchased without a plan for a full integration strategy. This is so higher ed. We buy the Ferrari, we drive it like a minivan. But with everything that's happening in AI right now, this is an area that integration is just going to be more of a demand. Murray alluded to this a little bit earlier, but when I think about experience design, I think about the breakdown between the brand promise and the actual stakeholder experience that's happening on campus. That's an area that higher ed marketers can influence in really strong ways if we can get the seat and the decision-making ability at the table. And then institutional priorities. So we have strategic plans on our campuses, we have priorities, but all of us experienced this in the last year. Those priorities are shifting faster than our operating systems are designed for, which causes midstream changes or updates, which can cause more alignment gap. But it probably shows up the most in budget alignment, which is what Murray was showing partially earlier, and what in this slide we're showing. Not only do you have large amounts of ad and paid media spend coming out of your decentralized markets or marketing budgets, but you also have a lot of decentralized staffing budgets that are not in the central unit. I think when we think about, yeah, there we go. Sorry, Maria, I thought we were on the other slide. What we can see, I think we've talked about decentralized versus centralized marketing teams for a really long time in higher ed, and we've almost looked at it like it was like this maturity model that we needed to get to, that we needed to centralize, and that was the like Shangri-La of staffing models. But what you're going to see in the data this year is that most institutions, their decentralized marketers don't have a direct reporting line to central marketing or any sort of formal relationship, and most institutions consistent across institution size have decentralization. So I think what we know about decentralization is that in many places, it's not an ideological planned thing. It's something that happens out of a function of survival. You've got divisions that create roles to get the work done, and that work can be anything from event planning, website updates, social media, internal comms and newsletters, and sometimes even acting as the de facto chief of staff for a dean. And as an industry, we tend to really focus on the org chart. But I think instead of asking whether decentralized marketers report centrally, the more important question is, have we designed integration mechanisms that can help match the complexity of our institutions? And maybe even more importantly, can we ask the question, do reporting lines actually solve alignment? Because at the end of the day, reporting doesn't necessarily equal integration. Dotted lines don't equal governance, and alignment depends on clarity, not just proximity. Our industry conversation often fixes on those reporting structures, but structure without integration still produces fragmentation. And org charts can signal structure, but they don't guarantee alignment. One of the clearest places in our data where fragmentation shows up is in content strategy, and I'm seeing this with the campuses that I work with too. This year, respondents told us that they have really strong relationships with decentralized marketers and that they're positive, which is really encouraging. But a third, when asked about content sharing, rated it as only poor or fair. And so that gap is really important because it's telling us that the issue isn't hostility between centralized versus decentralized marketers, and it's not lack of effort, it's likely lack of coordination. So when you think about how relationships are strong but content sharing is weak, I think we're seeing structural misalignment, not cultural failure. And goodwill alone, having great relationships, doesn't create integration either. We see this when content is duplicated or content is not being atomized to its full potential. I don't want to go on a tangent, but I think that one of the best examples of atomizing content right now is Dateline NBC. They're taking their TV shows, they're turning it into podcasts, they're repurposing the content in so many ways. And it always makes me think, what would we do in higher ed if we scaled that way and we thought about our content creation across our campuses in that way? Our campuses have so many amazing stories, but we're struggling not to have that central content library or to even be aware of all the content that's being created. So this is where we really need systems to help us solve this. Another interesting piece of the data this year is that we're seeing a decline in cross-divisional task forces. Our team thought a lot about this, and we had some kind of early thoughts around, is it because institutions are maturing? Is it a post-COVID phenomena, or where we went from having a lot of cross-divisional task forces and spending a lot of time in those to maybe correcting back the other way? Or are we just starting to abandon ineffective coordination? And that's the question. Like, the question isn't whether task forces exist, it's whether integration of those task forces is intentional and impactful. Because a task force, again, is not the same thing as integration. Just because you're having meetings regularly doesn't mean that it's producing clarity. And if working groups are lacking authority, decision rights, or connection to enterprise strategy, they might create the appearance of alignment without actually producing it, which is another thing that we see on a lot of campuses. So why does alignment feel so hard for CMOs? We are amazing relationship. Oh, Murray, I think we're jumping ahead. Thank you. Um, we are amazing at building relationships. We are strong in our ability to flex on campuses, but we need to evolve from being strong relational leaders to having structural leadership, designing systems that can carry alignment beyond just individual influence. Because when alignment depends just on personality, it disappears when we have turnover. I couldn't help myself as I was thinking about this. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm a real org theory nerd. And I wanted to take some time to talk about, okay, so why does alignment feel so hard for higher ed CMOs? And the truth is, like, executive roles at this level in higher ed are hard. That's not unique to the CMO role. There's a lot of pressure in these roles. And we don't want to act like we are precious because we are good at our jobs. We are not necessarily super special. We're just a little bit special. But all executive roles carry pressure, ambiguity, and bandwidth strain. But I want to talk like honestly about why CMOs so frequently bear the burden of the alignment gap. And I think it's because we're really good at holding complexity. But we also tend to be exceptional translators across silos, calm under pressure, fast, pragmatic decision makers, and we're often willing to say yes in order to keep momentum moving. And I would add, Bill and Murray, we are also the best dressed and best looking executives on campus. These are strengths, but in loosely defined systems, the strengths can become quiet compensators. And so, if you want to look for academic frameworks, because I know we love academic frameworks and it sometimes helps us communicate on campus, there are four academic frameworks I've pulled here for you. We don't have time to go into all of these, even though I would love to. But there's four disciplines that I want to share with you. So, there's the competence trap, which comes to us from organizational theory. There's success bias from decision science. In sociology, invisible load or labor, and in economics, we have Goodhart's law. And these frameworks all describe the same pattern. Alignment problems don't necessarily come from weak leaders, they come from strong leaders who are compensating for weak systems. So, when we think about that larger organizational institutional context, why does the alignment gap keep happening in our systems? Again, I think it comes from four different areas, possibly more, but I think these are the most relevant to CMOs. It comes from inconsistent organizational discipline, and you've all experienced this. Priorities shift and they're shifting quickly, but there's never trade-offs that are made. We just do more and more and more. Structural boundary failures. It's hard sometimes not to take boundary failures on personally, but we have to think about it larger than that. When ownership isn't clear or your scope expands, then urgency is going to win every single time. And then let's think about high capability and low definition systems. Like CMOs are excellent problem solvers. That's part of what makes us good at our jobs. And institutions start to rely on that competence to compensate for unclear structure. Um, and then the final one is marketing as the default integrator. We saw this last year in the CMO study where CMOs were really seen as the sense makers, the dot connectors. And so when marketing touches everything and there's institutional ambiguity, it's sent to marketing to be solved. So those are the structural reasons for the alignment gap. I'm also going to get on a little bit of a soapbox right now and tell you that I think we also have a cultural issue on most of our campuses, and I call it higher ed nice. In Montana, we say Montana nice. I've heard Minnesota nice or Midwest nice, but in higher education, we have our own version. And I think it includes avoiding naming structural misalignment directly, avoiding direct conversations in general, softening hard truths, accommodating instead of clarifying, and building on systems instead of auditing them. At Simpson Scarborough, we have a simple philosophy that we say internally, which we call say the thing, because if we don't say the thing, we can't fix the system. And higher ed nice is not going to help us get more resources. It's not going to help us fix these systems. It is just going to cause us more problems in the end. And that combination creates what we're calling alignment debt. So alignment debt is that invisible cost that builds when strategy, brand, tools, and expectations start to drift out of sync. And most of the time, it's not because people aren't working hard. Actually, everybody in higher ed is working so hard. But teams are serving different audiences. You've got decentralized marketers making smart local decisions, but maybe not aligned with a central unit. You're, as a CMO, are trying to keep momentum moving. And without shared systems holding that work together, that debt quietly compounds. And then over time, it becomes a tax. And it taxes your speed, your clarity, your impact. And it can show up as an inconsistent brand. You can have slower adoption of enterprise initiatives and new tools or technology, and a lower return on the investment that you're already making. This might feel to you like you're accountable for outcomes that you don't fully control, or you're making decisions without complete visibility, or you're just working harder than necessary to try to keep things on track. When systems aren't aligned, people start to create that momentum manually. Okay, so don't lose hope. That was a lot of hard information. But we are going to now talk to Bill for a few minutes about Bill's experience at Chatham. Bill, I'm hoping we could kick things off with you. We talked a little bit about your career, but can you give us the quick version of your time at Chatham in 14 years, what you did before, and how your role and scope have shifted?
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. So, as a marketer, I started my career in the agency world down in Raleigh, Durham. I started as an account executive. I began our digital interactive group when that was a thing and just starting off. Then I got moved into strategy and planning. And so, my career at the agency was all about kind of these evolutionary jumps of a marketer. Higher ed was one of our sectors and clients. So when we decided to move back to Pittsburgh to raise our family, that was one of the ones I was looking at. The opportunity at Chatham came up. I thought, oh, cool, I'll get some client side experience. I'll be here for 2 years and then I'll move on to the next thing because that's what agencies and others do. 14 years later, here I am, right? I'm still here. It's completely unexpected. I thought the opportunities and challenges that we get as higher ed marketers is so varied and has kept me here for as long as I have. I was hired to start in marketing. 6 months in, I was tapped to be the interim VP of enrollment management, and I did that for 14 months. That informed me as a marketer, informed my brand perspective. I came out of that. Chatham was two-thirds graduate enrollment at the time, as we were founded as an undergrad women's college. It led to a market research paper and an experience that we wrote out of marketing that ultimately led us to going all gender. And now we're majority undergrad, and our tuition revenue went from, under $10 million a year to over $20 million a year. So, that was kind of my thing. I always was just data-driven marketer, open to those, like the thing you just talked about, the CMOs, the first one to kind of see some things. And that's just what led me. So fast forward, you go through that transition, you keep doing all the things that marketing does, and then all of a sudden someone says, you're doing a lot in technology. Could you take on some of this oversight of IT and apply the things that you've been doing as a marketer externally, internally? And that led me to having IT added to the portfolio. Then the university went through what many small privates are going through, which is a budget gap post-COVID, some presidential transition and turnover. And when an institution is rethinking things and trying to kind of pull expense and revenue and think about it, that creates an opportunity that's very unique. For my situation, that broadened that portfolio to campus services. And so that added facilities, that added retail services, that added events and conference services, and ultimately shuttles and transportation. So it's a very different viewpoint and world I see today. But what I'm always struck by is how the throughput of marketing, brand, and the customer, in this case, student, is front and center in every single one of these. I tell a story. We were writing a market study years ago, making a case for this alignment gap between the reason they choose us. We knew this from marketing. It was all about our location in this beautiful campus. Then we actually saw that the satisfaction gap of the facility was the most important and the least satisfied. And we hadn't done a campaign focused in that area in years and years and years. We wrote a market research paper, moved that forward. It got a lot of traction, but then it gets stuck with the CFO or it gets stuck in other areas. Now I can align all of that stuff. And so it's all starting with your mission and your student, and then it just goes through everything else. And so marketing kind of sat at the top and the rest just followed. So it's been interesting.
Yeah. Bill, you make that sound easy though. What has been difficult about closing some of these alignment gaps? And did you ever think you would have plumbing under you?
No, I didn't. But I think as any marketer's portfolio gets bigger, either within marketing or extending out of marketing, you all probably can relate, right? It's like your viewpoint shifts from day to day, and you work with people who's like completely dedicated to one aspect. So you have to find time to lean in for them, to be there for them, even though you have the broader lens. So that's always important, is just kind of grounding yourself in, let me support the people in the areas that I'm supposed to be leading and supporting them. The other thing I would say is that the day-to-day marketing is harder and harder and harder. You really need that kind of mid-level team to be able to really bring that to life. Where I spend most of my time now with marketing, where I'd like to spend more, is on strategy and revenue. So we've been doing a lot over the last year as we talk about alignment. We've been, through the efforts, I've been leading pricing reviews, and we've done some repricing of graduate programs in light of the new loan limits and just general other things. Pricing in colleges has been pretty much the purview of the finance department. And for years, universities were able to just say, well, add 3%, add 3%, add 3%, add 3%. We had the demographics and we had the demand to support that kind of growth. We don't anymore. So you have to be much more sophisticated about how you price. So we're really bringing more sophisticated pricing models based on competitive markets and then profitability. And it's led to our ability to try some pilots, which in 6 months, brought a program that was declining, brought in over 20 students and $100,000 revenue with minimal marketing support. When we ramp that up, it'll go forward. So that's kind of where I like to be, and where I'm trying to fill those gaps, which I see a lot in the chat around pricing and product. And so we've been really able to influence, I think, a bit more those areas. And having a broader portfolio doesn't necessarily mean that. That just means that you've earned trust in the areas that they've been giving you. So when you bring that to bear from marketing's perspective, you have that trust with you and you can have more influence that way.
This has been awesome, Bill. Just one last question. You've got formalized authority in a lot of areas that are not traditional Marcom functions, and it does sound like you have helped to build a lot of trust over your time at Chatham. What advice would you give to CMOs who may have influence but not formal authority right now?
I mean, I think it's just continuing to build those relationships. It's continuing to be transparent and delivering your metrics when they're good and they're bad, but also not just saying here's what we are, but also pivoting around to give the insights from what you're talking about, right? Um, Even though you may not have influence over the enrollment budget, as an example, with the data you all were giving, right? We have a brand and enrollment committee, and one of our board members is savvy enough to understand, just don't give me the marketing spend, give me the marketing and enrollment spend combined and talk to me about how we're using them and complement each other. That requires trust and partnership with your VP of enrollment if they own that budget. But that's the right way to be thinking about this, right? It's like, yes, we may own them differently and we have the authority to kind of define what we want to do. But if we're serving our mission and our students well, we need to be coming to the table as stewards of that budget to say, we're really spending 5.5 million and it's here and it's here. And trust that we can make the cases to get to where we need to go. So ultimately, it always comes back to relationship. It always comes back to transparency, and it comes back to your ability to show the impact and the performance that you're having in the areas that serve the mission of the institution.
Well, Bill, I echo everyone at Simpson Scarborough thanking you for joining us today. If you're not connected with Bill, please do so. Bill and I are also the co-chairs of the AMA Higher Ed Symposium. You can find
Yeah.
us there. Um, we are now going to head into the final section of this webinar, and we're going to talk a little bit about what alignment looks like and how to turn decentralization into harmony. So I think the data is clear, right? Decentralized marketing is more common than not. And the question isn't whether it exists, it does. It's the question is it aligned? So I want to show you something that we've been developing called the alignment flywheel. So alignment isn't a one-off activity. It's a continuous improvement cycle. And I think this is where our campuses often get hung up. We love to point out problems and we love to stay in that assessment cycle and we love to diagnose things, but getting to that next cycle of the alignment of the sense making and communicating and then getting to the behavior change that's required in the activate stage can be really difficult. So the goal of alignment isn't just shared understanding, it's shared action. And we want to keep this going on our campuses and not just get stuck in one spot. I add this because I want to make sure everyone understands we spend so much time talking about org charts and we need to think about strategy over structure every single time. What we see in our organizational assessment work at Simpson Scarborough is that when structure is redesigned but without strategic clarity, all you do is move misalignment from one place to another. But when strategy is clear and when priorities, trade-offs, and outcomes are explicit, structure can finally support the work instead of straining it. And that's how we can get some of this alignment debt to stop compounding. So I define alignment like this. Alignment is when strategy is clear, structure supports it, leaders reinforce it, culture reflects it, and experience expresses it. And alignment isn't always a reorg. It doesn't always have to do with staffing. It doesn't have to be a dotted line. It's not another working group. It's when what we say we value is reinforced by the decisions that we're making and how visible stakeholders can experience those decisions. So I also wanted to give you something practical, right? You might be sitting here, you might immediately be able to diagnose alignment gaps within your team or on your campus. But here's some red flags that Murray and I thought about if people are saying these, it probably signals that you've got alignment debt building. And honestly, you've probably said some of these too. I know I have been guilty of that. But these are clues to you that priorities aren't explicit, decision rights aren't clear, or systems aren't holding the way that we need them to. If you're hearing these phrases on your team regularly, you're probably living in what we call malfunction junction. So I live in Missoula, Montana, which is an absolutely exceptionally beautiful place, but city planning is not one of our strengths. We have a lot of crazy roads, but we have one intersection that locals call Malfunction Junction, where multiple roads converge and everyone is confused. So if you find yourself in Malfunction Junction, here's three things you can do right now on your campus. One, name the intersection. Call out where decisions are colliding and say the thing. Two, clarify one priority and work to reduce ambiguity in that one high friction area and just take it one quarter at a time. Just do one thing a quarter. The third one is define one decision right. Make explicit what's fixed, what's flexible, and who has autonomy to make decisions. And then, because I love an analogy and I have shown incredible restraint on this webinar, here is my best analogy. You don't fix malfunction junction by repainting the cars, you fix it by synchronizing the signals. Thank you, Murray, for letting me have that one. Okay, as we wrap up, I want to tell you that our core belief at Simpson Scarborough is this: the alignment gap doesn't sit in just one area of your institution or your department. And in moments like this, we have this instinct that is to either centralize harder or add more rules or tighten approvals. But control doesn't create alignment, it creates more friction. I want you all to think about alignment through the human alignment approach, which asks a different question. It's not how do we control this better? It's how do we equip people to make better decisions consistently at scale? Because alignment doesn't come from enforcement, it comes from clarity and confidence and shared understanding. All right. That is the majority of our amazing webinar, but we now have some other great news to share with all of you. The first is that we have a new diagnostic tool that we are releasing. It is called the Alignment Index. It's a quick 3 to 5 minute survey, and it'll help benchmark your institution not only against our full CMO study data, but you'll get a score for different areas like role clarity, decision rights and boundaries, operational alignment, and budget distribution. So if you are interested in this, you can be among the first to take this and have access to this diagnostic tool by just scanning this QR code. Or if this content has sparked questions and you're thinking about your work or your leadership in a different way, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us at Simpson Scarborough or to me. The alignment index form that you will find through that QR code has a direct link to my calendar booking, and I would love to spend some time with you. The next piece is CMO Lab. It's in Boulder, Colorado this year. If you enjoyed this time together, which I think you did, and you found community with this group, you can do this for a couple of days in June in the amazing Boulder, Colorado, where I hear there may be some stargazing in the mountains. as well as the chance to build community and talk about the biggest issues of the day in person together. Early bird pricing ends on March 9th. That's the QR code for that. Okay, one more QR code. You can also read all of chapter 1 now and sign up for the next chapters that are coming out and the upcoming webinars by using this QR code. And with
Okay.
that,
Think I'm now going to stop showing my screen so that we go full screen. I think we can all see each other. Okay, big thank you to our panelists, Jenny and Bill. That was a great conversation. I think when we think about alignment, and the big takeaway is that it's not fixed through a cookie cutter approach. And when I look in the chat, one of my favorite things about these webinars is what goes off in the chat, seeing CMOs at each other and connect with each other. That's exactly what we want. This is a community, and only by talking to each other about these things, they often feel like group therapy sessions. It can really help us every day. So thank you both for joining us. I think we do have time for one question from the Q&A. I want to kick that question off to both of you to think through. So, should we invest in centralized or decentralized Marcom stuff? What are the pros and cons of each of those? Uh, Jenny, what do you think about that?
if I can find my mute button. So I think obviously from the centralized view, you do have it can be sometimes easier to align folks around strategy and around institutional goals. However, I do think decentralized staff can bring real strength in having localized expertise, in being able to create better, stronger relationships outside of the central unit, and to have depth where you might have in the central unit folks who um, are generalists and generalists in the university, which is fantastic. Having that depth of content strategy, strategy in general for things like enrollment can be hugely helpful. So I also think there are a lot of different models. It's not centralized or decentralized. It can be hybrid models. There's a lot of different operating models that you can explore.
Bill, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, I would just echo what Jenny said. I think everything is very organizational dependent, right? And you will know your organization better than anybody. I am at a small private institution where centralization is the model. But that I've talked to other CMOs at other organizations, and they are looking in decentralized, and so it just really ultimately depends. I will say at the last AMA conference, there was some really great proposals and sessions being submitted. I think we selected a couple on cross-department collaboration, everything from brand camp to how to work in a decentralized environment. It was really great content, and I think it shows that there's a hunger out there for people to be like, if it's central or decentral, how do we make sure we're working the best that we can and coordinated for the mission of the institution? So another little plug for AMA, but that was also something that struck me around this conversation.
Bill, we're happy you're here, and you can plug AMA as much as you want to. It's for the benefit of the community. All right. Okay. I think that's all we've got time for questions. If there are any questions that were submitted that we didn't get time to cover today, then me and Jenny might do a special video series and answer those questions for you and release those on our LinkedIn and our socials. But thank you so much for joining us, everyone, today. This was just chapter 1. So we have 2 more chapters coming up. Chapter 2 is going to be on growth and the data we found from the study on how institutions plan to grow, and measurement and how alignment across institution can really be enabled by consistent measurement. So thank you so much to everyone for joining. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you to our team at Simpson Scarborough. And looking forward to seeing all of your faces again in the future. Thanks so much.